Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Contract, a Commander podcast. I'm Mike Almond, and joining me is my co-host, Alex Lapp. Alex, what's up, man?
Not too much, Mike. And today we're going to be talking about some of our favorite deck types or archetypes on EDH Rec, which is the premier Commander information website and the company I work for now.
Well, yeah, so, I mean, it's true, even if they're not paying you to say it.
They're not.
Well, then there you go. So that's the best part. It's true, and it's just true. With that, we're talking about, like, I think at this point, we've done several episodes. This is actually episode 31, I think, we're going to do in the release schedule. It's pretty defined as far as where we typically go as far as deck archetypes. But going into the cards that are often in that archetype and literally having the math and synergy percentages to back it up, these are the cards that you typically find in these decks, is something kind of cool that we can examine. And I think there's a couple of cards on there at the same time that we might not necessarily run as much as the numbers indicate that people normally do. And I think it's fun to explore that kind of idea.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be going through the top commanders and the top synergy cards for each archetype. But before we start, synergy means something very specific on EDH Rec. If you don't know, synergy is specifically referring to the uniqueness of the presence of that card in that archetype, specifically in reference to it not showing up in other archetypes. So if you have a card that is only run in an archetype and no other ones, it would have very high synergy. But if it's run in every deck of any archetype, like Sol Ring, that would have very low synergy. Not because it's not played, because it is, it's played everywhere. So no specific archetype really lays claim to it. So we're going to talk about the high synergy cards in each archetype, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's how unique it is across all archetypes, and then how common it is to be put in the archetype that we're actually concerned with.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and start with, I'd say, probably the biggest theme that we hit collectively as a podcast, and that's group hug. So as far as EDH Rec is concerned, they have qualified 906 decks on their site as specifically, this is a group hug deck. With that, it's about the 50th most, I guess we're going to say, documented type
you can
of
say popular.
Deck. Because here's the thing. I don't want this to be something where it's there's less of it, it makes it less popular. Because some of these decks, it's a group hug deck, and maybe there's not as many different types of group hug decks because there's not many different types of group hug commanders, or specifically group hug commanders, but popular is still probably right.
Let's start with some of the top group hug commanders. We're going to go down them pretty quickly, and then we're going to move over to the top cards by synergy in the group hug archetype. Mike, I'm going to have to take the lead because these are my boys right here. Kineris and Tira Melitis. This is the top group hug commander. They're in 373 group hug decks, and I mean, this was my first deck I ever made for Commander, and it's just awesome. So Kineris and Tira Melitis is red, green, white, blue for a 2/8 legendary creature human soldier. At the beginning of your end step, draw a card. Each player may put a land card from their hand onto the battlefield. Then each opponent who didn't. Basically, the way it works is that everyone at the table may either play a land from their hand, put it onto the battlefield, or draw a card. And then I, as the controller of KNT, do both. And that's at the beginning of my end step. Very simple. And Mike, this is just great value, and it can go a lot of different directions. And my deck is very generic, group hug, good stuff value. It was my first deck, but I love it so much, Mike. It's what a great group hug commander. And I just want to call out K and C, both men, and they love each other as gay men, and that's just fantastic.
It is an awesome card. It is an awesome message, and it is in a tier by itself as far as Group Hug is concerned with 373 decks. Our next closest one is at 153 with kind of a surprising one, but I get it because the card can do literally everything. Kenrith the Return King, 4 generic and a white for a legendary creature, human noble, 5/5. Let's go. Okay.
Let's go. Here we go.
Pay a red. All creatures gain trample and haste until end of turn.
Very
Pay
nice.
1 generic and a green. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. 2 and a white. Target player gains 5 life. 3 and a blue. Target player draws a card. 4 and a black. Put target creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. It does literally 5 different things, but more importantly, it's target. So
Target or
it's
all.
not just it's all creatures gain trample and haste, and it's an ability that doesn't require you to tap Kenrith, so it's always available.
Right.
Put +1/+1 counter on target creature, target player, creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. So I get that this could be Group Hug, but when I think Kenrith, I don't necessarily think Group Hug first. So it's kind of surprising me that it's in this many Group Hug decks.
That's very true, Mike. Kenrith is, like KNC, but even to a greater extent, an extremely generic commander. And that doesn't mean boring. That means that he can be built in a very wide variety of different deck archetypes. Group Hug really isn't the first one that comes to mind. Of course, it's the first one that came to mind for me when I saw Kenrith. And why I incidentally decided not to build him was because if you look at the costs of these activated abilities, they get very high very quickly. For example, if I want to give a player a card that's 4 mana, 3 and a blue, that's a lot. So Kenrith really excels as a payoff card for generating infinite mana, which is a perfectly fine way to build a deck, but that's not really how I like to build my decks. And if you're not making an infinite mana, Mike, this is pretty slow. That's why I ended up deciding not to make one.
Yeah, that's reasonable. I've thought several times that it might be interesting because I want to make a Thantis deck really bad because I just think it's an interesting commander to have to play with. As a group slug, everybody attack, let's speed up the game, let's do some stuff that I don't want this to be a combo game. I want this to let's go. I've thought several times of making a Thantis deck and it's actually just a Kenrith deck. Because the idea of, oh, you know what? We're going to do things that encourage combat. By the way, now everything has trample and haste. Let's go.
Right.
But
So
at
do
the same
Kenrith
time,
force combat.
yeah,
Yeah.
kinda. And I love it. And then, hey, mana sinks, all that, etc. All the good stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get why this is here. I think we close out here with, would you say this is the most Group Hug cards as far as commanders are concerned?
Yeah, I mean,
Or is
this isn't the first Group Hug card ever printed. That goes to Howling Mind, but this is the
Sure.
first Group Hug commander that was ever
Yeah.
printed. And that's Feldegriff, my boy.
Yeah.
My good boy. Mike, tell me about Feldegriff.
So this is the goodest hippo. The goodest Feldegriff is the actual creature type,
Yes.
which is still one of my favorite.
Feldegriff
things.
is the creature type.
It's 1 generic, white, blue, green, so Bant, for a 4/4 that says, pay a white. It gains flying until end of turn. Target opponent gains 2 life. For a blue, you can return Feldegriff to its owner's hand, and target opponent may draw a card. Or you can pay a green, and you give another player a 1/1 green hippo, which is still my favorite thing. And Feldegriff gains trample until end of turn. It is... I'll say this. I know Rachel Weeks has a Feldegriff deck that is, in her statement, it's not good, but it does win. It catches people off guard. Because if you can generate a ridiculous amount of mana, great. I'm going to give somebody 41 ones in a turn. By the way, every time you get a creature on the battlefield under your control, you lose a life. Stuff like that.
Right.
But I like Feldegriff just because of the silliness of, hey, you want 5 tokens? Here you go. Let's do some giving of some hippos. Let's give some people some life to keep them in the game. Do you need a card? oh, you're doing something bad to me. Well, I'm going to put Feldegriff back in my hand. And you know what? You've been cool. Why don't you have a card? It's such a silly commander.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to note that, I mean, obviously Commander didn't exist when Feldegriff was printed, so Group Hug didn't exist as an idea. But for the longest time, this was the premier Group Hug Commander, and I think, in a way, it still is the most iconic one. In popularity, it's certainly been supplanted by KNC, and I think KNC is more versatile and has a lot of great options. But Feldegriff is the OG, Mike, and it's great to see it. Now, $45, I think this needs a reprint, but it's on the reserve list, so that's never going to happen.
The weird thing is that, that price, I don't know when it spiked, but it was recent enough.
People just buy cards out, Mike.
Because there was a couple of years ago where I bought this card mint, and I think it was $10,
wow.
Which is still expensive for a card that's not been reprinted. Don't get me wrong, but for it to jump to 40 plus, wow, I don't understand it.
That's proxy your Feldegriffs, people. Don't spend $45 on your Hippo.
No.
Let's look at some of these high synergy cards, Mike. Starting with Rites of Flourishing, which is a green enchantment that's in 94% of Group Hug decks that it can fit into, which means it is 92% synergy. That means that only 8% of the decks that it's in are not Group Hug decks, which makes a lot of sense, Mike.
Sure.
Rites of Flourishing, 2 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws a card. So you get 2 cards on your draw step, and each player may play an additional land on each of their turns. So, Mike, those are just the 2 things that every player wants to do. Every player wants to draw cards. Every player wants to ramp lands. And this just helps everyone do it. That is the true essence of Group Hug.
Sure. And what this is not a card that I think you play unless you're playing Group Hug.
Right.
Maybe a lands deck just to have a 3-mana enchantment that says play another land each turn.
Yeah, maybe.
But in a lands deck, you're trying to accrue more value than everybody else. That's kind of your whole deal.
Right.
So you're not going to play a card that puts everybody on the same page unless you're also getting additional value, which means that it's a decent card, but there's probably better that you can put into your 99. I love this card, and it's in several of my decks, and
absolutely.
Yeah, they're all Group Hug in some way, shape, or form.
It just gets work done. It's not going to put any individual person ahead. It's just going to get the game rolling. It's a very nice 3-drop card.
Absolutely. The next one does surprise me a little bit that it's... Again, we talked about synergy and how unique it is to that particular theme. I can't believe that people don't play Dictate of Kruphix in other archetypes that care about drawing cards or other people specifically drawing cards, especially if it's not on your turn. 1 generic blue for an enchantment with flash that says at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. So it's Howling Mine with flash.
Right. For an extra mana.
Yes. I've seen so many different, Nekusar cares so much about other people drawing cards. What is the snake making commander from last year? Xyrus, thank you. I understand they care more about wheels, but at the same time, it's extra cards. You just want people picking up cards for every reason. And I mean, I get it. This isn't the most insane value, but having flash, it seems a little weird to me that it's so fixated on Group Hug.
Well, I think that a lot of people probably who would have considered running this moved over to Kumena's Awakening when that got printed in Rivals of Ixalan, which is a very similar card, 2 blue for an enchantment with Ascend. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card. If you have the City's Blessing, instead only you draw a card. So for 1 more mana, later in the game, it becomes an asymmetric card draw, which I think for a lot of people is what they want, but obviously for you and me, we like it when other people draw cards, so.
Sure. That makes sense. It just... I would expect it to... I'm not saying it doesn't belong in Group Hug. I'm not even saying that it belongs in more other archetypes. For it to be the second most synergistic card in Group Hug, especially when you go to the next one, it's like, I don't know anybody who's casting this other card. I don't know anybody who's casting our next card that isn't playing Group Hug.
Right. Collective Voyage is a sorcery for a single green mana. Join Forces. We talked about Join Forces in our last episode, Mike, and... what a fun effect. Starting with you, each player may pay any amount of mana, Each player searches their library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the total amount of mana paid this way. That's all players combined. And puts them onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffles their library. That's in 79% of all group hug decks that it can fit in, with 78% synergy.
The only reason that I would play this in a deck that wasn't a group hug deck is if I was mono green and I was playing against a lot, like, unless I knew I was playing against a lot of decks that were going to also be monocolored. Just because then you're typically running less basic lands. You've got a couple of them,
right.
So maybe you can outvalue them in the long term. But at the same time, it's so good.
I tend not to run very many basics unless my deck is 2 colors or fewer. Really, I only have a single 2-color deck, my Simic deck, and that deck runs... No, I have a couple of 2-color decks. They both run like 15 to 20 basics. But once I'm up to 3 colors, I'm like basically trying to run as few basics as I possibly can.
Okay.
So that being the case, and I think a lot of players like myself have very greedy mana bases because we want to fix. We want to make sure our decks run. And so if you're running a non-group HUD deck and you play this, and people put in without considering how many basics they have left in your deck, maybe they have 3 or 4 left, but you know for a fact that you have 20 left, you're going to come out on top easily.
Yeah, and then it gets into a how well do you know your deck and everything.
I hope you know your deck.
Because it's a sorcery and you cast it, what typically happens is, okay, great, I'm going to cast this spell, and I'll pay for 4. The issue is that there's a very, very likely chance that everybody else at the table can just go, yeah, I'll take 4 lands for nothing. Thanks.
Well, that's the point. We talked about this in our previous episode about mechanics. I think that your best bet on this is to use it when people have untapped mana and then don't pay anything into it, or pay like 1.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you pay enough into it that people can shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, I'll take 4 lands, then
that's fair.
I don't think you've successfully cast a spell for the purposes that I would want to be casting it. But let's keep going.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. You said let's keep going. I'm absolutely going to make you read this next card.
Oh, fair enough,
I know
Mike.
about how much you love it.
Okay, so this is Quain, Itinerant Meddler. I didn't expect to see this card on here. For white and blue, it is a legendary creature, Rabbit Wizard. It's a 1/3. With the activated ability, tap. Each player may draw a card. Then each player who drew a card this way gains 1 life. And this is in 77% of group hug decks that it can be in, with 77% synergy. Mike asked me to read this card, not because it's a Rabbit Wizard or because it's Howling Mine, but because when we reviewed this card in our Commander set, Commander Legends set review, I called it out a bit for being just so aggressively boring as a group hug card, which...
As a group hug card.
Right.
Because Rabbit Wizard is kind of cool.
It is cool.
But the rest of it is just...
Commander Legends brought us a lot of extremely interesting and unique cards. And even some nice group hug cards for us. But Quain, to me, it feels that this design is very boring. It feels that I would never be excited about playing this. And indeed, I got the opportunity to play Quain a few weeks ago when I drafted Commander Legends at my local game store, and it simply was not a very interesting deck, and I won't necessarily blame the set designers for that. I'm not a very good drafter, but I think I knew ahead of time that this is just, it's a card that does one thing, exactly one thing. You decide when you want people to draw a card. Usually in my experience, you tend to want to do it at the end of the player's end step before the beginning of your turn, or if somebody needs a card right away, you can cut a deal. But that's really about it. There's not a ton of like super interesting things you're doing with this, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. Great.
It's Temple Bell.
We talked about it. It's Temple Bell as a commander or as a creature. Which, okay, sure, I guess. Right. Admittedly, I made you read that card because yes, I know it bothers you, and I want to give you a chance. It bothers
me. It just I'm disappointed.
That it disappoints you. That's fine.
I'm disappointed, Quinn.
But there's that, and because I very much wanted to make sure that I was the one who got to read our last card here, because we both love it so much.
This is one of my favorite cards in the whole game.
Yeah, let's talk about Veteran Explorer.
Hooray!
1 green for a 1/1 for a human soldier scout that says, when Veteran Explorer dies, each player may search their library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield. Then each player who searched their library this way shuffles it. Let's keep in mind that at no point in that statement did I ever say the word tapped.
You sure didn't, Mike.
It's so good.
I think I have 4 green decks. This is in every single one.
Mm-hmm.
I like to call this card my personal soul ring because
Sure.
it's 1 mana and it ramps for 2. Except instead of just ramping me for 2, it ramps the whole table for 2. And Mike, when this card hits the table and eventually finds a blocker to throw itself against, or somebody can remove it, or you can sacrifice it, or any way to destroy it, because, right, you can't just get rid of it when you want to. Somebody has to have something for you to swing into, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. But once that happens, the game just is off to a rapid and healthy start right away. And that's one of my favorite parts of Group Hug. We discussed this when we had our good friend Dana Roach on, that one of the best parts of Group Hug for me personally is allowing people's decks to function even if they don't have a very good deck. And this card does exactly that, Mike.
It does. And I've actually found something with this in a couple of recent games, because I have this card in just about every deck that I can put it in, mm-hmm. because it's
incredible.
I personally have a ramp issue. I have to have more of it than any person should have. I would rather have 30 lands on the battlefield with no cards in hand than have a hand of 20 cards with no max hand size and 4 lands on the table. Like, I just give me all of the real estate.
I have a similar issue. Like, I love to ramp, and I love to draw too, but I don't love to run card draw spells. I love to run ramp spells, though, like this one.
That's fair. One of my favorite things that I've done with Veteran Explorer in a not a CEDH game, not like a hyper competitive game, but like a more competitive game. Like, we were playing at the table and we had prizes picked out, right? Mm-hmm. I played Veteran Explorer on turn 1, and then I just held on to it. Because one of the things that happened is people asked me, hey, are we going to pop that? And I'm like, you know what? Not yet. We're gonna chill.
You're teasing them.
And here's the thing. It made it to where people, believe it or not, chose not to attack me. Because I was just like, I don't know, we'll see what I get in my hand next turn. Because I just didn't have the hand that was really going to take advantage of it, and everybody else was really eager for it. So they didn't attack me, because that just meant there was one less person that I could attack the Veteran Explorer into when it came to my turn if I got the right card in hand. And it was kind of weird.
It's
and
an
eventually
dynamic.
Eventually I did just get an Ashnod's Altar, and I was like, oh, well, great, then I'll just do this whenever I want. Perfecto. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very cool card. If you don't run it,
you should
throw it into a deck.
Yeah.
It doesn't even have to be a group hug deck. Obviously, there's a high synergy here, but it's such a cool card that transforms the game. We've had several streams where you can catch us at twitch.tv/nerdworksmedia, and there's such a cool thing where you play this card, and the other people at the table
their faces light up.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, like, you changed the math on everybody's hand.
That kind of deck. We're gonna have a good time tonight.
Yeah,
yeah.
And that's why we love it, and that's why I'm very happy that it's in the top 5.
Absolutely.
All right, so those are the top 5 synergistic cards with Group Hug, and some of the more, well, not some of, like literally the most commonly played commanders when you're talking about Group Hug. But sometimes you just want to see the world burn, or flip over crazy stuff, or shuffle everything that's on the battlefield into everybody else's hands and exchange control stuff. Let's talk chaos. Let's go! Talk to me about some of the most chaotic commanders, Alex.
Sure, Mike. So at the top we have what I would not expect to be here, because to me this doesn't really seem like chaos. This seems like a coin flip. And that's Okan, Eye of Chaos, partnered with Zindersplit, Eye of Wisdom from Battle Bond. So Okan, Eye of Chaos is a 3/3 legendary creature, Cyclops Berserker, for 4 red. At the beginning of combat on your turn, flip a coin until you lose a flip. Whenever a player wins a coin flip, double Okan's power and toughness until end of turn. I've seen that rapidly dismantle people
for
with
sure.
the power. And then Zinnersplit is a legendary creature homunculus for 4 and a blue. It's a 1/4. At the beginning of combat on your turn, flip a coin until you lose a flip. Whenever a player wins a coin flip, draw a card. So I guess in a way coin flips are chaotic because you really can't control whether it comes up heads or tails. But when I think of Chaos Mike, I think of some of these other commanders on the list that are a little bit farther down. I don't know if we want to move to those.
Yeah.
But
let's run through real quick here, because just not to go into individually, these are the things, but Zinnersplit and Okun, okay, coin flip, I guess there's a lot of cards that when they say flip a coin, a lot of different things can happen.
Right.
The next one listed is Zedru, which doesn't feel very chaotic to me. It feels literally control-y because you're exchanging control of things or giving things away. Krark and Sakashima of 1,000 Faces are the next
flip.
one.
Yeah.
It's just another coin flip and literally a card that copies the thing making coin flips, presumably.
Right.
Before we get to Yidris,
which is a Cascade commander.
Cascade, I guess Cascade could be, but that's
I had
not
a
really
word
what I think of.
with the people at EDH Rec, because we were looking at the Chaos list, and I'm like, wow, so many of these cards are Cascade, and I would think that Cascade would be its own archetype, separate from Chaos, but
sure.
I guess they have quite a bit of overlap. But Cascade, as a reminder, is when you cast the spell, you'll reveal cards from the top of your library until you find a spell with lesser mana value, and then cast that spell ahead of the first spell. And that is chaotic, but it's really its own thing because Cascade's a very very common keyword that shows up on a lot of different cards.
Right. But
it's not until after Yidris that we start to see some Chaos cards that I'm like, oh yeah, here's a Chaos commander. Like Norin the Wary, which is a commander for red, 1 mana, for a 2/1 legendary creature human warrior. Whenever a player casts a spell or a creature attacks, exile Norin the Wary, and then return it to play under its owner's control at the end of turn. Mike, this, to me, this is a Chaos commander.
Whenever a player does a thing.
Right.
It's so
you
good.
Constantly just have this trigger going off all the time. And it works well with Chaos decks, number one, because it's red.
Yes.
And I think we can all agree, if there's one color that's going to be in Chaos deck, it's red. And specifically because Chaos decks like to do a lot of wacky things, like exchange control of permanents, and wipe the board, and shuffle everything into people's libraries and draw out cards. But whenever that would happen, Norin is gone. So you'll get him back at the end of turn, and it won't be, something you have to give up all the time. So I think this Norin makes a lot of sense as a Chaos commander, and also it's great because he's super cheap.
Yeah, I like him, and I'm sure there's other ways to construct this deck other than I'm gonna get out Norin and Perforos and hurt people every time that somebody does a thing and then get him back. But at the same time, it's just a fun commander idea.
Now there is another one after Norin that's is coin flip, but to me this is much more chaotic than normal coin flip deck. Mike, tell me about Rakdos.
Yeah, this is the showstopper. This is 4 generic black red for a 6/6 flying trample demon. When Rakdos the Showstopper enters the battlefield, flip a coin for each creature that isn't a demon, devil, or imp. Destroy each creature whose coin comes up tails. Entertain me as the flavor text, which I'm a big fan of. First of all, I love that it's not flip a coin. If you win the flip, destroy that creature. It's just no.
Right.
Rakdos decides all tails die. Yeah. And you're right. This is one of those cards that I love the idea of this being my commander, just to say, you know what, I just want to have a hopeful board wipe. Whether or not I'm actually putting it onto the battlefield, I don't know. But obviously you can run your demons, devils, imps, stuff like that, and then flip coins and see what sticks around after the spell it's a neat card.
It certainly is. I think that kind of lack of control of the outcome, the specific outcome of the effect, is really what exemplifies chaos. But at the same time, you're planning on this happening, so of course your deck can be primarily constructed out of devils and imps, or maybe it's just not even a creature-based deck. And in that case, Fractos works fine. So let's move on to some of these synergistic chaos spells, Mike.
Sure.
Let's see what we have here. All right, so Mike, a lot of these high synergy cards, especially near the top of the list, are very heavily into Cascade, which we did just talk about. So we're not really going to go into these very much because I'm very picky. I feel that Cascade is not chaos.
It can be, but it's not. Yeah,
it's just its own thing, really, in my opinion.
Right.
So first we have Maelstrom Nexus, which is Wooburg for an enchantment. The first spell you cast each turn has Cascade. Very powerful. Emoti, Celebrant of Bounty, 3 green blue for a 3/1 legendary creature Nagadruid with Cascade. And spells you cast with mana value 6 or greater have Cascade. Apex Devastator, 8 green for a 10/10 Chimera Hydra with quadruple Cascade. So you'll Cascade 4 times when you cast it. And then, Mike, we finally get to a non-Cascade card. Tell us about this one.
Hey, we're there. So this is 9 Lives, which has some of my favorite card art in Magic. Just all of the Mufasas
all the
and the
kitties.
clouds. And then this regal cat just looking to the skies. 1 generic white for an enchantment with hexproof. If a source would deal damage to you, prevent that damage and put an incarnation counter on 9 lives. When there are 9 or more incarnation counters on 9 lives, exile it. When 9 lives leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. This is one of those cards that when it came out, I think there was a vast majority of people that just went, well, all right, I guess.
It's a white lich card.
There was a certain subset of people, and I know you and I were among them, that were like, oh, Zedru loves this.
Yeah, Zedru loves that. Now, yeah, if you were looking at this card and you're like, why the heck would I run that? Like, lich effects are bad. Well, consider that a lot of chaos decks, Zedru included, but many other red decks, love to exchange control of permanents, and there's no better permanent to exchange control of than one that you really don't want to have. For example, a card that when it leaves the battlefield, you lose the game.
Yeah. It just also, nothing makes me happier than it has hexproof, but it doesn't have indestructible as an enchantment.
Right.
So it's just, okay, I'm going to destroy all enchantments. Oh, well, dang. 9 lives is one of those good cards.
And then later on we have some more coin flip cards. Planar Chaos is 2 and a red for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, you'll sacrifice Planar Chaos. And then whenever a player casts a spell, that player flips a coin. If they lose, counter that spell. This actually is pretty chaotic for a coin flip spell. I do think this belongs here. Because,
this absolutely is something we could talk about more.
Yeah, let's talk about this a little bit, because you're hitting yourself too. If you flip a coin and you lose the flip, you're countering a spell. This makes people very unlikely to want to play their spells into it. They really just want to get rid of this. But if they try to get rid of it, they might just lose their removal spell, Mike.
I think the whole point of playing a chaos deck, and this goes against a lot of the Magic the Gathering and Commander type of idea. The whole point of playing a chaos deck is that when something is about to happen, it's the anticipation of what is actually going to happen here. Exactly. And that is something that I think needs to be the feeling of the actual player playing that deck as well. Because otherwise it's not really chaos, it's controlled chaos. And
that's something else.
I don't know. Yeah, that, you know what that feels like? That feels like a deck that would have a whole lot of Cascade in it.
Now, here's a card that really, to me, this is the quintessential, this is the Chaos card, my Chaos Warp.
Sure. Yeah.
2 in a red. This is, not only is this the Chaos card, but this is probably the best mono red removal spell ever printed.
Yeah.
It's an instant. The owner of target permanent shovels it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. What a fun card to resolve, Mike. There is never a time when you resolve this card and everyone at the table is not just like 100% of their attention is on what that top card is going to be, because it could be anything.
The best thing that I have ever seen with this card, and it was used against me, was I had a Martyr's Bond on the battlefield with a whole lot of stuff that was going to be a problem. just great. I'm going to be able to destroy a whole bunch of stuff. Martyr's Bond is going to make it's going to be great. After that, nothing was better than that being Chaos Warped, shuffling my deck, giving it to the person who had the Chaos Warp, having them cut it, taking my deck, putting it back on my side, and revealing the Martyr's Bond again.
Yeah. That is
it's so much fun.
It's like a 1 in 70, 1 in 80 chance of happening, and it's always a delight when it does. But
we always we all freak out. We're all like, "What's gonna be?" And I love that stuff.
It's fun. Yeah, that's it could always be your game ender. It could always be your Bloodstone Colossus, whatever you have. Yeah. But it could be a land. It could be a non-permanent spell, and then you whiff. There's just so much excitement when this card resolves. I love this card, and this, Mike, this is the essence of chaos to me.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and the fact that it's just like, you know what, I'm going to cast this on myself because I want to see what I get. Right. Always good. That said, you said that this is the epitome of chaos for you, and it's got chaos in the name. Like, you're very much there.
Right.
I want to see your Chaos Warp, and I want to raise you a Possibility Storm.
Yeah.
Because when we talk chaos and what is the card gonna be, nothing makes me happier than Possibility Storm, because the only thing that's going to happen is what I'm playing is not going to be what I'm playing.
Right.
3 generic, red for an enchantment that says whenever a player casts a spell from their hand, that player exiles it, then exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a card that shares a card type with it. That player may cast that spell without paying its mana cost, then puts all cards exiled with Possibility Storm on the bottom of their library in a random order. I'm going to cast this Veteran Explorer, except for this Veteran Explorer is going to be literally the next creature in my deck that is not a Veteran Explorer. I'm going to cast this Wrath of God. No, you're not. You're going to cast something else that's a sorcery. Possibility Storm is so much damn fun.
It is, and I think that this both epitomizes the fun of chaos and also why so many people tend to have a negative attitude towards chaos. And that's because chaos is a very similar, it is a kind of archetype that we love. It's an archetype that is political. It affects the whole board. It changes how the game is played, and it causes impactful things to happen that involve people at the table. But the way that chaos does that, especially with cards like Possibility Storm, of which there are a lot of in chaos, many, many effects like this, that it basically makes it impossible for you to play your deck. Your deck kind of plays itself, which can be really fun, but I think I understand why some people don't really like that.
I do get that. I think all games, especially if it's with a group that isn't necessarily familiar with what type of deck you play or your play style or things along those lines, I think that you should, as a part of sitting down, say, hey, my name is blank. I'm going to play this deck. It does blank. Because I would hate playing against a chaos deck every game.
And you're not ready for it.
But I would love if every once in a while somebody says, hey, y'all want to get weird? Let's play chaos. I'm going to play my chaos
It's
deck.
a nice once in a while thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally get it. Possibility Storm is silly and dope, and at the same time, yeah, I put cards in my deck because I want to play those cards. I get it.
Right on.
So with that, we're halfway through. So we're going to take a quick break here, and we're going to come back with all of the Stax cards and the politics, the political themes with the Synergy and Commander, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. All right, we're back, and we're talking Stax. We're talking Stax.
We're talking
so I'll tell you,
Stax.
Yeah, all right. It's important to talk Stax. I understand. I get it.
Mike has to take his vegetables.
It's not my vegetables.
It's like your Brussels sprouts.
This is, you know what this is? This is me helping somebody move. Because, like, I could not do it, right? And I understand that it's something where they're going to have to move anyway. Maybe if I help them move, it'll go faster, and they're my friends, so of course. It doesn't mean I have to enjoy it at the same time. But you know what? We're we're going to lean into it a little bit. At the very least, it'll be a learning experience for me, and I can appreciate that. Talk to me about our commanders while I bite my thumb and learn to embrace the moment.
Yeah, you got it, Mike. Now, this top commander is no surprise, really, to anyone who's played Commander. Grand Arbiter Augustin the Fourth, or GAAIV, as we like to call him. For 2 white-blue, it's a legendary creature, human advisor, a 2/3. White spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast. And I think it's worth noting that this card is one of the saltiest cards that's ever been printed, as voted on by the users of EDH Rec. Salty meaning that they don't like it.
What? A card that makes your stuff cost less than everybody else's stuff cost more is something that makes people salty? That's so weird. I don't know. This is a card that if it hits the table in the 99, all right, you got me. Even if it's a Stax deck, fine, you got me. If I see somebody who brings this deck out and this is the lead singer of their deck, I'm already in a position where, listen, you might be a wonderful human being, but I am going to judge you as a Magic player for a while until you prove me wrong.
Yeah, this is a famous Stax commander. If you're playing Stax in CEDH, there's a strong chance that you're playing this one.
It hurts me.
Shall we move on down to Derevi?
Yeah, and this is one that actually hurts me for a different reason. Derevi, Imperial Tactician, green, white, blue, so a 3-mana bird wizard that is a 2/3 with flying that says whenever Derevi enters the battlefield or a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may tap or untap target permanent, but for 1 generic green, white, blue, put Derevi onto the battlefield from the command zone, which is a ridiculous ability.
It's
by itself.
Never before or since.
No,
there's the closest thing is Yumiko, but
yes,
even that's not quite the same thing.
Ninjutsu.
Right?
Yeah.
Because this is an instant speed ability that is very difficult to stop from happening, and it also has that benefit where the commander tax is never increasing.
Right. Your commander will always cast as either 3 or go onto the battlefield as an ability for 4, which is awesome. Do you know what bothers me about this card, though?
What's that?
Obviously, the tapping down everything and getting it to a point where, oh,
right,
great,
absolutely.
You can't do anything. I get that. What bothers me is that this card could be really cool as an untap effect for you to get value, and I'm going to untap my Gaia's Cradle again, or my Mana Rocks, or I'm going to give this creature pseudo-vigilance and all this cool stuff, or put it onto the battlefield to give somebody a block that they didn't have earlier, etc. But that's never how it's going to be played, and more importantly, that's never how it's going to be perceived to be played. So I can't try and use this deck without having to get absolutely crushed into the ground for game upon game until I finally prove it.
Yeah, Mike, this card is infamously oppressive. Just swinging in with a ton of triggers, a ton of tokens, and getting all of these tap downs, completely locking people out, and then untapping all of your powerful lands and mana rocks to cast a ton of free spells. Derevi, you just can't get rid of her. The only way to stop Derevi is to lock her down like an Imprison in the Moon kind of style effect. Now, the next card that we have is a different kind of Stax. It's not necessarily the kind of Stax that I play, but this is sort of play fair style Stax. Lavinia, Azorius Renegade. For white-blue, she's a 2/2 legendary creature human soldier. Each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with mana value greater than the number of lands that player controls. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. Now, this is not very oppressive. This is basically saying, okay,
everybody play fair.
Right, everyone play fair. But deeper than that, it's saying that if you're ramping with artifacts or rituals or mana dorks, you're not ramping at all.
Right.
Or you can, but you're going to have to make sure you play it across multiple different spells instead of one big spell. And then things like Force of Will, Cascade, like we talked about earlier, casting something from your graveyard without paying its mana cost or from the top of your library, casting your commander without paying its mana cost. That's automatically countered by Lavinia. So this is white-blue, like Grand Arbiter Augustin, but I think it's a lot more fair than Grand Arbiter.
Yeah, this is basically no, you will get no value unless you're jumping through 1,000 hoops to do so. Like, you can cast spells that you can use your mana rocks and such. It's just, by the way, as you're doing so, you're still got a restriction on it. This is actually kind of the Stax that I'm more comfortable with.
Right.
Because it's not stopping people from playing the game of Magic. It's encouraging people to play the game of Magic in a more fair setting. Or at least a more, I guess, as the original rules intended setting. I don't know exactly what to consider it there. But this is one of those decks that I've actually tinkered with a little bit. I haven't actually wanted to purchase the cards to play said deck, because then I'd have it, which means that we would probably play fairly well, and then I'd want to play it because it's a decent deck, and then I'd lean too far into the dark side, and I'm very happy being a good Grey Jedi at worst. But it is an interesting card, especially as a Stax piece.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we go ahead and lean into all of the high synergy cards for Stax. And with it, there's one that kind of stands out at the top, which, when it came out, it was pretty controversial, I think, in the EDH community. And then kind of tapered off like most things do when we have a wonderful, wonderful community and a wonderful, wonderful format. But we get really mad, and then usually we calm down, is what it seems like.
Everything's the end of the world for Magic players, right?
Yes, absolutely. Until the next end of the world thing comes, and then we forget about the
Remember The Walking Dead? You remember that?
Oh, yeah. I, again, still not happy about it, but I'm much less concerned than I was. Why don't you talk to me about our Magistrate
You
here?
got it. So, classic hate bear right here. Drannith Magistrate, 1 and a white for a 1/3. Human Wizard, your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands.
But
Now,
that's where most spells come from.
Exactly.
Why are people so mad?
Why are people so mad? If you're not a Commander player, or you don't play Commander a lot, this may not immediately come to mind. But the main thing that this says, Mike, is that, I mean, where's the place that people love to cast spells that aren't their hand? The command zone for their commanders. So this says that players can't cast their commanders. But it also says they can't cast spells from their library, from their graveyard, or from exile, or from other players' hands.
Yeah.
So this is a very effective hate bear, and it makes a lot of sense that this is the top card for Stax decks.
Quick question for you. Do we think that people would be less angry about this card if it said players instead of your opponents?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that this is a...
I agree with you. I was kind of wondering there, because it does stop people from doing the thing that most commander decks want to do, cast their commander. I totally get it. But I think I'm on the weird edge where it's like, you know what, if this said players, I'd probably actually be fine with it.
I'm already fine with it, Mike, because sure, this is oppressive. It says you can't cast your commanders, but
sure,
Mike, this is a creature. It's a 1/3. Like,
yep.
And oh no, I can't cast my commander. Well, you know what? I can cast a removal spell out of my hand, and then I can cast my commander.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm not sitting here talking about how I hate this card.
Right.
It's more of the Stax than it is the whoa, this one's insane. But you know, at the same time, if it takes a removal spell to get rid of, that's one less removal spell that they have for your actual threat later.
Well,
which
this is kind of a
is
threat.
why it's there. Yo, for sure. Let's talk about something that could be a threat, but really just to somebody having a good time. Let's go with Aven Mind Sensor as our next card. 2 generic and a white for a Bird Wizard. 2/1 with flying with flash. If an opponent would search a library, that player searches the top 4 cards of that library instead. Good luck with your tutors. Good luck with your fetch lands. Good luck with your anything that says go in your library. because you're not going that far anymore.
Mm-hmm. Now, we talked about this card recently during a recent set review, and it wasn't because it was so good, even though it is. It was specifically because there was a new card printed in black, Opposition Agent, that basically...
Which we might get to later.
Which we might get to. That basically makes this card... I mean, I wouldn't say obsolete, but I would say completely outclassed in every way.
Yes. Yep.
But this card has existed for a very long time, and it's been frustrating players that entire... The fact that you can flash it in as soon as somebody casts their tutor spell or activates their fetch land, you can really just make it so it's almost impossible for them to find what they're digging for. And even if it only hits one person once, I mean, that can be enough. Part of the problem with hate bears and Stax pieces is that since they're on the board invisible, players can play around them, but you can't play around this, at least not the first time it comes out, right?
Mm-hmm. It's like, again, it's a creature, so it is subject to removal. It's a 2/1, all that stuff. This is really good at getting somebody once. So it's almost like a...
Well, then it's going to chill the rest of their tutors. They're not going to cast any tutors.
Yeah. I kind of do the, like, I almost consider... If I'm playing this card, I almost consider it a pseudo counterspell that is very specific to one type of counter.
And tutors are worth countering. They are...
Absolutely.
I mean, we often hear the old adage, don't counter the tutor, counter the spell that they go to get. But if you don't even have to counter the tutor because they're not going to get to play it, then that's even better.
That's true.
Let's talk about a far, far more impressive card that also has a rattlesnake on it. Aura of Silence. This card is very, very mean. 1 white for an enchantment, artifacts, and enchantment spells. Your opponent's cast costs 2 generic mana more to cast. And then it has the activated ability, Sacrifice, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Now, those two abilities do function separately very well, but together, that's where the real chill comes in. And when I say chilling effect, what I specifically mean is not like, ooh, that's scary or that's spooky. When I say chilling effect, I mean that the effect is so threatening that it makes players not want to commit things to the board or cast spells because they're going to either have to spend too much mana or have it removed, or in this case, both. Can you imagine casting an artifact, a mana rock? You're casting your Soul Ring for 3, and then they blow it up.
Yeah.
At instant speed.
And here's the other thing about this that it's... Like, Seal of Cleansing is a 1 mana less card with the second ability of this that I've put into decks before.
Right.
For 1 more mana to be able to say, hey, by the way, everything that you're playing, artifact and enchantment wise, it's going to cost you a little bit of a tax. That is staggering. The most, go look at all of the themes on EDH Rec. The most highly played theme is artifact.
Yeah, we love artifacts.
So the idea of, by the way, all of these mana rocks, all of these win conditions for some decks, the biggest type of theme that is on EDH Rec, all of it's going to cost you 2 more. And so will all of your enchantments. And by the way, if you do get something on there, I might blow it up if it's good. So you really just have to remove this before you can do anything. And also hope that you don't have anything on the board that they're going to blow up out of spite. Aura of Silence is very good.
I want to hit this one more time, and I realize our listeners have the message here. Like, yes, this is scary, and the 2 abilities synergize together, and it's a rattlesnake. But let's really dive in to why this is specifically so devastating. And that's because the best way to get rid of a rattlesnake is to bait it, right? You have to get the rattlesnake to bite, and then you can move in for the kill. Or it destroys itself, right? So you want the controller of Aura of Silence to activate the ability to destroy the artifact or enchantment. So then you can play the real artifact or enchantment that you actually wanted to play, just like a counterspell, right? Well, here's the problem with that.
Yeah.
The bait costs 2 more. So you have to overcommit just to bait it out, which is so devastating, Mike.
Yep. It's the counterspell. On top of that, we've said it 1,000 times. The best counterspell is the one that you don't have to play because people know about it, so you counter more spells than you would have. This is one of those things where I don't want to play this thing because then I can play it and they might just destroy it anyway. And if literally more than one person says that, then this is a counterspell that's just an enchantment.
Yeah.
That's just chilling on the board. And
that's
the kind of stuff that really hurts.
Absolutely.
Really hurts. Let's move on to something that hurts less. Definitely less, but in totally different ways. Archon of Emeria. 2 generic and a white for a 2/3 Archon with flying. Each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. Non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tap. You want to talk about Stax? Let's go slower, and let's not have anything that is not a basic do anything immediately.
This is the rites of flourishing for Stax, right? Everyone in the game wants to cast spells, and they want to play their lands. And this card says, no, you cast 1 spell per turn, and your lands enter tapped. So the game is grinding down. Literally everything is happening 1 turn slower in the best case. And if you're a spell slinging deck or a cantrip deck trying to sling out a bunch of spells each turn, this card is absolutely going to wreck you.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, I really like the rites of flourishing, but in Stax. I love that.
Oh, thank you.
That metaphor. Simile? I don't remember. It's been a while since I've taken an English class.
Yeah.
Okay. I like it a lot. This card, however, because you say Magic players like to cast spells and have their lands enter, and EDH players are very specific about don't blow up my lands. That's not cool. We've got we have a social contract that lands are if you're doing land destruction, you better say something about that, because no one wants that to happen to them accidentally or on surprise. And by the way, if you say something about it, there's also a decent chance that you're going to be targeted first, even if you're not the threat, because you're the one who might destroy my world. Archon of Emeria, I love casting lots of spells. I like value. I like playing lots of lands. So this is one of those ones that does get pretty rough. Alex, I took Veteran Explorer from you, so I thought it would be good especially since you're the one who got to tease it a little bit before. Why don't you move on to our last card here?
Sure, Mike. Opposition Agent is quite possibly the strongest stack spell printed in years.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps if it is second to anything, it would be second only to Hullbreacher, but I think this is the stronger one. Opposition Agent, 2 and a black for a 3/2 human rogue with Flash. Flash is the big one. You control your opponents while they're searching their libraries. If it ended there, it would still be one of the best Stax pieces ever made. But it keeps going. While an opponent is searching their library, they exile each card they find, which is to say that you do. You may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. That's after Opposition Agent leaves the battlefield. And you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast them. Mike, this card probably shouldn't exist. This is so utterly, devastatingly powerful. This is the ultimate anti-tutor card. We've seen Aven Mind Censor. We've seen other cards Stranglehold that prevent players from looking in their library, but none of them can even touch Oppo Agent, Mike.
It's better than Aven Mind Censor in literally every way, except for, I guess, flying. If you really want to, want to try,
it's
and
better
find
than
something.
Aven Mind Censor.
Well, it's
black.
Okay, but here's my point. That's also part of it. So, white versus black.
Yeah.
Black is a better color in our format.
By far.
3/2 versus a 2/1. It's already got more toughness. Both have flash. You get control, and you get to pick, versus they only get to pick the top 4. It's so silly, because the other thing that you can do is just fail to find. You can fail to find with Aven Mind Sensor, but sometimes you're going to get lucky. Opposition Agent, if they use a land, if it's an Evolving Wilds, it's okay. You're not going to find one. Keep going. It's such a rough card for 3 mana, and woofa doofa.
That's the thing. Why would you fail to find? Because whatever you get, you're getting for yourself. And taking it from them, even if you never get to play it or don't have a use for it, you basically are bribing a card out of their deck, and they're never going to see it again.
Because it's play, not cast. And I get it. The worst case scenario for Opposition Agent is still the best case scenario that you're going to get with Aven Mind Sensor.
Exactly.
And that's insane to me for a card that is valued at the same mana cost and still better in every single way. Except, again, flying, I guess.
I think we can safely call this a strict upgrade, and we talked at length when this card came out in our Commander Legend set review, just about how frustrating it is to see cards like this get printed in colors like black that are already extremely powerful and dominant in the format. However, it exists, and as long as it exists, Mike, this is a phenomenal Stax piece. One of the best ever made. The last card I'll talk about here is the partner to Oppo Agent, and that's Hullbreacher. If you think Oppo Agent isn't the best Stax piece in the game, it might be Hullbreacher. 2 and a blue for a Merfolk Pirate, 3/2 with Flash. If an opponent would draw a card, except for the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, instead you create a treasure token. Now, as Oppo Agent is a strict upgrade from Aven Mind Sensor, which is a white card, Hullbreacher is a strict upgrade from Smothering Tithe, which is a great white card that was printed just a couple of years ago, and it's been going in every white deck since then for months and months, and we just love that card. Great card. Hullbreacher kind of just blows that right out of the water, Mike, and it's just why? Why did they make this card? Why is it so good? And specifically, why is it so much better than the white version of it again?
I don't have an answer. I never will. And I'm sorry. I'm reveling in these cards and the fact that we're going to talk about one more of these than all of the other ones. So we've got to move on.
All right. Let's move on to something more palatable for Mike here. Our politics theme, and there are some very interesting cards in this theme, but specifically, this theme tends to focus on effects like voting and table decisions. So, Mike, let's hear about some of these politics commanders. They only have 3 listed.
And one of them I just kind of disagree with. So we start with Kenrith. We're not going to go into full detail. Kenrith is a political commander because A, they're a king, they're a human noble. Sure, why not? Also because they do literally everything, so
and can do everything to any player or permanent.
Yes.
So
totally
very political commander.
The next one that they have is Aloro, Ageless Aesthetic.
Okay. Aloro's a life gain commander, Mike.
Yeah. I'm not sure how this works, but
probably because it's in Sultai, and Sultai is the political wedge, right? Like,
well, then I'll tell you what, Aloro, take a look at him. Life gain deck.
Yeah.
Let's talk about another Sultai deck that I actually do agree with somewhat.
Oh, yes.
And hey, let's talk politics. Politics is something we like to play. Alex and I agree. Politics is great. By the way, here are the 3 commanders. One of them does everything. One of them, not really a political commander as far as we're concerned. And the third one of the saltier cards that exists. Send triplets. 2 generic, and Sultai for a 3/3 legendary artifact creature human wizard. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose target opponent. This turn, that player can't play spells or activated abilities and plays with their hand revealed. You can play cards from that player's hand this turn.
Wow.
Ugh.
Like, this is one of the commanders that when you see it, it's kind of a kill on sight kind of thing, right? Because
this and Grand Augustine are both commanders that I'm like, I do not think that we are going to be friends. Right. I'm sorry, I don't see it in the cards, friend.
Wow, what a powerful commander. So there aren't that many commanders that are listed as politics commanders, but this is a archetype that can be supported by many different commanders.
Yeah. Well, the one I did want to bring up, and I'm kind of, I totally understand that it's new. It's because it's literally been weeks, not even months or years. But Brina the Demagogue.
Oh, right.
Is Brina the Demagogue like one of the most political commanders that's out there right now?
Almost certainly.
Okay, so again, we've talked about her before because awesome, but one generic white-black for a 1/3 flying bird warlock. Whenever a player attacks one of your opponents, if that opponent has more life than another of your opponents, that attacking player draws a card, and you put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature you control.
Great.
It's very cool.
That's Gahiji right there, but in Orzhov or Silverquill.
There's, like you said, there's plenty of commanders that can be played as a political aspect. My Vivictus deck, I play it as a political deck as much as I can.
Watch our VODs, he does.
I want to give everybody, like, unless there's something that absolutely, no, that thing needs to go away. I like to let people pick more times than not. I almost play it like a political chaos deck, if anything. I want people to flip things over. I want awesome stuff to happen, but I want the game to move forward and extend, as opposed to just stay static or to shut somebody out. And that's not necessarily a card that I see anywhere on here. Politics is much more about the way that you play your deck than the commander itself is kind of what I'm thinking at this point.
Right. Now,
but in the 99...
things get interesting. Now, in our most recent episode about mechanics, we did talk about two of the primary ability words that are going to show up on a lot of these cards, and that's Will of the Council and Council's Dilemma. These are both from Conspiracy 1 and 2, which are political sets that have this everybody votes or everybody makes a decision. So let's go down a few of these, but really we did talk about this mechanic quite recently. For example, Council's Judgment. We did just talk about this one. 1 white for a sorcery, Will of the Council. Starting with you, each player votes for a non-land permanent you don't control. Exile each permanent with the most votes or tied for the most votes.
Sure.
This is not just political, but one of the best removal spells ever printed.
Mm-hmm.
Love that one, absolutely. We have some interesting cards that you don't see in very many decks because they only work with cards that involve voting. So let's look at a couple of these, Mike. Let's look at...
I'll be honest, there are... I don't know that I've ever seen any of these cards.
They really only work if your deck is specifically a voting deck. It has
to be.
Yeah.
Which is, the more I'm looking at it, something that would be awesome to play.
Right.
But yeah, let's start with the first one, Illusion of Choice, which, awesome name for a card.
Name.
Very happy about it. This is a 1 blue instant that says, you choose how each player votes this turn, draw a card. That could be a really good cantrip.
Yeah, if your deck
Holy cow.
has voting spells in it, and you're casting, say, Expropriate, and you want to say, have everybody vote for time instead of money, and you take 4 extra turns.
See, that's awesome. Where my head went to first was, I would like to cast a 4-mana Council's Judgment.
Where you pick
and
what
I'm
gets
going
exiled.
to exile 4 things. That's
Wow.
gross.
That's really something, Mike.
I'm going to exile 4 things. Also, I will draw a card. Yikes.
We also have Brago's Representative and Ballot Broker, both effectively the same card. And they say, while voting, you'll vote an additional time.
Mm-hmm. For a 1/4 and 2/3 creature human
They're
advisor,
both 2 and a white.
Yeah. And yeah, sure. Okay, voting additional times. That's pretty cool. I like it. I think making a voting deck would be kind of cool. I don't know how good it would be.
It's not really about how good it would be for me. It's about there aren't really enough voting effects in the game specifically that are relevant to Commander that are worth playing. And I said this last episode, I'll say it again. We need another conspiracy style set with the politics, with the deals and the backstabbing. That's the best kind of set that I love. But let's look at a few of these cards that do have voting, but goodness, I don't think that they are really strong enough to see play in most cases. Like, this is an interesting one. Grudge Keeper. For 1 and a black, a zombie wizard 2/1. Whenever players vote, each opponent who voted for a choice you didn't vote for loses 2 life.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's
very minor.
It's minor, but it is interesting. Like, this is why I kind of want to make like a voting deck, because that does seem kind of okay. Great, I'm going to do a little bit of damage. That makes sense. All right, fair enough.
And then here's one more that we didn't talk about, but I wish we had. Friend or Foe, which was a cycle from Battle Bond, one of my favorite sets to play and draft. Mike, you want to tell us about some of these Friend or Foe cards?
Yeah, so we're going to start with Per's Whim here. 3 generic and a green for a sorcery that says, for each player, choose Friend or Foe. Each friend searches their library for a land card, puts it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffles their library. Each foe sacrifices an artifact or enchantment they control.
Love it.
It's very good. And my issue with these is, we'll get into this with the next one, because I again, this is my love for lands. Even when I'm playing my lands deck, I'm weird. I want everybody to do all of their stuff.
Right.
I want everybody to explode. I want all of the craziness. So Per's Whim, I usually just read this as a 4-mana tempting offer.
That's interesting.
But I'm going to do it for everybody. Everybody, you know what? Here you go. We're all going to go get a land. We're going to get our best land, put it on the battlefield. Unless somebody really is the arch enemy. Like, they have to be the arch enemy, and they have to have one thing that is being a problem that I can blow up. Or, more importantly, have them sacrifice for me to ever want to actually choose for somebody to be hit by this card on the other way.
Now, Mike, I incidentally love this cycle, and I love Per's Whim. And while we're reading this, we may as well read its closest analog, Tempt with Discovery. Just 3 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. Each opponent may do the same, and for each opponent who does, you will do the same again. Mm-hmm. So you can get up to 4 lands, and each player may take up to 1 land. For a time, some people were arguing that Per's Whim is much better than Tempt with Discovery, but I think that it's really 2 different options. Because Tempt with Discovery has a very high ceiling and a very low floor, but neither of those are necessarily going to happen every time. You could get all 4 lands, and that's a really good. You might win the game if you get 4 lands off of it.
Oh, yeah, but you probably should.
What could also happen is your pod could do the command zone thing, the command zone strategy, where they all go get their strip mines and blow all your lands up, which is very mean. So that has the chance of happening. However, with Per's Whim, that can't happen, but you also are not going to get 4 lands. However, you do have this new dynamic when in Per's Whim, because with Tempt with Discovery, yes, it does have that higher high, but you are very much at the mercy of the table as to what actually happens. Per's Whim flips that dynamic completely. You make all of the decisions for Pier's whim. You decide who gets the land. You decide who sacrifices an artifact or enchantment. And as you go around the table making these decisions, it's very interesting to see how players either preempt that or react to it. It's interesting how players will argue their case, because I think every player wants to get the land, right? No player wants to sacrifice their artifact or their enchantment, unless they're in an artifact deck that likes to sacrifice artifacts, in which case maybe you just get them the land, right?
I guess I see the upside of this card if it's, okay, I think this is where I take off. I'm going to cast a 4 mana, get my best land out of my deck, and everybody else is going to sacrifice an artifact or enchantment.
That's Great. Just the thing, though. It doesn't have to be that way.
It doesn't. But the thing is that if it's not that way, and I'm not casting it that way, me as a person, rather than somebody who's kind of scanning the board, I don't like the idea of giving everybody value unless the only person that I'm really hindering is either the arch enemy or someone who is really being oppressive. This is one of those... I even get that this is a card that I should cast and then say, who wants to be a friend?
Exactly. That's my question.
And I get it. But, it's so
You really
rough.
just take the screws to him like, hey, I would love to give all of you some free lands. However, I have not been very happy with some of the moves that Mike has been making over there, and I'm concerned that I'm going to have to make him sacrifice that fat, juicy artifact. Like, how can we turn this around, Mike? What can we do? What can you do for me, Mike? Like, that's the kind of dynamic where I love it in the game because it's not real, right? I'm not actually manipulating people in real life. I'm not hurting people. Right. And in the game, we're just having a grand old time. Like, Mike's squirming in his seat, and Alex is on the upper ground here and can make Mike basically do anything to avoid having to sacrifice his biggest thing. It's just my kind of card, Mike.
No, it's... Again, I don't dislike it at all. It's just one of those cards that I'm... Well, I'll tell you what. We're talking about a couple more cards in this than we probably planned on. And I kind of want to talk about something else that's friend or foe that I really like.
Okay.
So, Vertice's Maneuver. 2 generic and a black for a sorcery that says, for each player, choose friend or foe. Each friend returns a creature card from their graveyard to their hand. Each foe sacrifices a creature they control. There is so much aristocrats. The aristocrats, I think, was the second highest theme.
Very popular.
As far as the listed ones. Graveyard recursion, all of this other stuff. The idea of having a card that's just, hey, I'll tell you what, you put that back in your hand. Or, sorry, if you want to put that back in your hand, you can... That thing needs to be sacrificed, and that thing needs to be sacrificed. Because there's so many commanders that do not ever need to be... they don't need to be in combat for them to be very oppressive or a problem.
Right.
There's a lot of decks that I need to figure out a way to make that thing go away. I'm going to make them sacrifice it. That feels much better to me, and for 1 less mana, which is pretty nice. I don't feel like I'm giving... potentially game-ruining choice and power to the people that I choose friend, where I could with Per's Whim, where it's, you got a Cabal Coffers. That is not something that I knew you had in your deck, but I probably should have assumed, I guess. Dang. I really wish I could have just said you could put this creature
You're trying to
back.
avoid the blowout, and you're willing to make to run a more mellow card in the cycle for that trade-off.
Yeah, because... It's just, sometimes the upside of making somebody sacrifice a creature they control versus the upside of somebody sacrificing an artifact or enchantment they can control, they're close enough to me in a, like, outliers aside. Sometimes enchantments and artifacts are absolutely a problem, and the only way to get rid of them is to sacrifice, I guess. Sometimes a creature's a problem, and you're not really going to get... You have more options to get rid of a creature. But that also means that you have to have the right card for it. The downsides are... The downside of Vertice's Maneuver going against me is lower. And that's all.
Okay. Mike, I have one more card I'd like to talk about. Not in the cycle, But I think that we would be remiss if we didn't talk about scheming symmetry.
Sure.
For a single black mana sorcery, choose 2 target players. Each of them searches their library for a card, then shuffles their library and puts that card on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
This is
it's a very good card.
Right up my alley.
Yeah, it's a very good card. Hey, who wants to be a friend? Great. You and I are going to go get the best card in our deck.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go.
I'm going to need you to go get a board wipe.
Yeah.
And...
Hey, we could agree that this is a problem, right? Okay, great. I don't have a board wipe that's going to work.
But you
Do
might.
you?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's go. Scheming Symmetry is one of those cards that when it came out, I got very, very excited.
Just great card.
And unlike a lot of the things in Magic, I didn't get excited and then go, oh, this isn't as good as I'd like. It's literally just been fun.
It's absolutely as good as you would think. Absolutely.
Yep. So I'll tell you what, Alex.
Yeah.
I teased it a little bit during our break. There's been one card. It showed up in every single thing that we talked about as far as the cards that play well with it. In everything except for Chaos. And I think it's just because it's not a red card.
Okay.
Edric Spymaster of Trust has showed up in every single one of these cards.
Really?
Yeah. And I kind of get it. Despite the fact that I don't think that anybody who actually plays an Edric deck does so to get these kind of effects. So, Edric Spymaster of Trust. 1 generic, green, blue for a 2/2 elf rogue legendary creature that says whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may draw a card. And I get it, because if I'm playing Group Hug, great, I want to give lots of people cards. Makes sense.
It's in my Group Hug deck.
If I'm playing Politics, I absolutely want all my opponents to hit each other. Mm-hmm. I want to be cool. They're not going to get a benefit from hitting me. Why would you hit me? Go draw some cards, man. I kind of get the Stax, I guess. If you're playing... I think you'd have to be playing Bant more than just Simic. If you're looking for a Stax deck. But the ability to keep cards in hand to have answers to whatever, fine. I could see it. And I understand why it's not in Chaos. But the only time I've ever seen this deck played is always when you're looking at somebody who's playing the cheapest 1-mana evasion creatures that they possibly can to just outvalue and get tons of cards. And I was really surprised to see it in such diverse types of themes. I don't know. Does it surprise you that it's in all of these themes?
It does a little, but Edric Spymaster is just a generically extremely useful and powerful card.
Oh, absolutely.
As a commander, he's absolutely dominant. Edric Flyingman is one of the strongest decks in our entire format. Mm-hmm. Simic is arguably the strongest color pair in our entire format. And drawing cards for each creature that deals damage is a phenomenal effect. And you're directing hate away from yourself. It really is the whole package. And it only 3 mana.
It's a very good... again, it also falls into that it can do so many good things and so many interesting things. But it's also a commander that can do one very, very oppressive thing and is very infamous for doing it. So it's another... How much do I actually trust this person when they say, oh, don't worry, it's not that type of Edric
Now, if you've
deck.
never seen that type of Edric deck, Edric Flyingman. A Flyingman is a 1/1 flyer for 1. And turns out there are actually a lot of creatures in green and blue that are 1/1 flying or unblockable for 1.
Yep.
And if you swing in, you're dealing damage, you're drawing a card. And you're drawing a lot of cards.
More of those.
Drawing more of those and probably drawing some extra turn spells. Edric Flyingman is extremely, extremely powerful. It's very low to the ground, which means it has a
despite
low
being
mana
very high
value.
in the air.
Yeah. Oh, you're too much. That is an interesting observation, Mike. I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad that we got to talk about all of these different cards in these archetypes that are in our wheelhouse. And I know that you personally are not the biggest fan of Stax. And
I appreciate the knowledge and history of the game regardless,
right.
though. So, Alex, I'm with you. I was happy to talk about these cards and the high synergy in the types of decks that we lean towards. If somebody wanted to reach out to you and talk to you about these cards or just about anything else in EDH, how would they find you?
Absolutely, Mike. They can find me on Twitter at Lappermedic, LAPPERMEDIC, or you can email me directly at alex@edhrec.com.
If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe and rate the podcast. We have a Discord link in our show notes.
Do.
If you want to be able to communicate with Alex, myself, other people that enjoy this kind of conversation, great. Come on over. With that, you can submit cards for our "Ooh, can I see that" segment. We actually love trying to find more little hidden gems in EDH. And of course, Alex, a judge. If you have a judge question, sometimes it's cool to kind of ask and see if it gets put on the podcast. And also, we like getting questions. Most of the time, I don't know the answer, but at least I know somebody who does.
Really?
You can also
Who?
follow us. Well, that's you.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry about that. I know we haven't leaned into that this episode. I only asked you 12 questions about how things work as opposed to our traditional 20. But you can also follow us on Twitter at EDH_social or email us at thesocialcontractedh@gmail.com. We hope you enjoyed our dive into the themes of decks that we play, and we'll talk to you next week.